Hello, dear members of the Soul Stories family. Today we will bring you a romantic love story. So let's get started. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any meaningful stories. Night fell over the small town like a heavy velvet curtain, cold and suffocating. Elara Morgan curled up on an old wooden chair inside a rundown shack of a house, the dim yellow light casting shadows across her face, highlighting the deep sorrow in her piercing blue eyes. Wind howled through the cracks in the door, whispering threats only she could hear. In front of her sat a stack of papers, her father's shaky signature sprawled across them next to a blood-red stamp. "You have to sign it, Elara. If you don't, they'll kill me." Mr. Morgan's voice trembled, his frail hands gripping the edge of the table. The stench of cheap whiskey clung to his breath, making Elara turn away to hide the pain clawing at her chest. The father who once held her in his arms and told fairy tales was now just a fading shadow, swallowed whole by gambling and debt. "What do they want from me?" Elara asked. Her voice was eerily calm, though her heart pounded in her chest. She had long mastered the art of hiding emotion, since her mother walked out, since the heartbreaks, since the endless nights working as a nurse to pay off her father's debts. Mr. Morgan dropped his gaze, unable to look her in the eye. "A contract, a marriage. The man, he's wealthy, secretive. They said as long as you're still, pure, and keep quiet, the debt will be cleared. You'll have a better life." Elara let out a bitter laugh, dry and hollow. "A better life? You're selling me to a stranger." She shot to her feet, fists clenched, but she couldn't cry, couldn't scream. She only stood there, staring at her father with a mix of fury and despair. But Mr. Morgan only shook his head. "You don't have a choice, Elara. If you don't sign, they won't just kill me. They'll come for you too." She knew it was true. The mafia didn't bluff. She'd seen what they did to people who defied them. The scars, the screams, the quiet deaths in the night. Elara slowly sat down, picked up the pen, her hand trembling. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried in a long time. Not since the man she loved betrayed her, leaving her with a shattered heart and stolen trust. She signed her name, each letter cutting through her like a blade. Just hours later, Elara sat in the back of a sleek black car, the windows locked tight, flanked by two silent men in black suits who felt more like shadows than humans. She didn't ask questions. She didn't resist. What was the point? The car sped through winding roads, leaving behind the only home she'd ever known and heading into the mountains. Rain began to fall, the droplets sliding down the windows like the tears she refused to shed. Eventually, the car stopped before a massive wrought iron gate. Beyond it stood a grand but eerily cold mansion, like a cursed castle straight out of a dark fairy tale. One of the suited men led her inside, through marble corridors and past dusty old paintings. There were no sounds of life, no warmth, only a silence so thick it threatened to choke her. She was brought into a vast room where a man stood with his back to her, staring out the window. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with neatly combed black hair. His tailored black suit clung to his frame, radiating power and mystery. When he finally turned around, Elara nearly forgot to breathe. His face was sharp and cold, his eyes a haunting ash gray, devoid of emotion, as if life had drained all joy from him. But something, perhaps the small scar at his temple or the flicker of pain in his expression, held her gaze. "I'm Gabriel Thorne," he said, his voice low and hard as granite. "From this moment on, you are my wife." Elara felt the blood rush to her head. Wife? She had never met this man, never even heard his name. But the look in his eyes allowed no argument. It was the look of a man who had lost everything and feared nothing. "Why?" she managed to ask, her voice hoarse with tension. "Why me?" Gabriel stepped closer, close enough for her to catch a faint hint of sandalwood cologne. He looked at her like he was appraising something rare. "Because I need someone like you," he said flatly, "and because you have no choice." She wanted to scream, to break something, but she stood still. He was right. She had no choice. Not today, not in this life. He pointed to a door that led to the hallway. "Your room is upstairs. Don't try to contact anyone. Don't ask about my past. And don't expect love. This isn't a fairy tale. He turned and walked away, leaving Alara alone in that massive room, her heart heavy with a single question. Why would a man like Gabriel Thorne need someone like her? That night, Alara lay in an unfamiliar bed. The silk sheets were soft, but they couldn't warm the chill inside her. She thought of her father, her little town, those long nights at the hospital where helping others gave her a sense of purpose. Now she was a prisoner, trapped in a loveless marriage with a man whose darkness she couldn't begin to understand. She closed her eyes, trying to fall asleep, but Gabriel's face lingered in her mind. Those ash-gray eyes, cold yet enigmatic, like a puzzle she wasn't sure she wanted to solve. She told herself, "You'll survive this. You always survive." But somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered, "Or maybe something's waiting for you here, in the dark." Morning light slipped through the thick silk curtains, casting a pale glow onto the cold marble floor of the mansion. Alara woke slowly, her body aching as if she'd just run through a long nightmare. She lay still on the luxurious bed, listening to the heavy silence that blanketed the house. No bird song, no footsteps, not even the whisper of wind. Just silence, so complete it felt as if the outside world had ceased to exist. She sat up, her golden hair tangled and falling around her shoulders. The white silk nightgown she wore, something that had been prepared for her in the wardrobe, made her feel like a stranger in her own skin. Alara Morgan, the humble nurse from a small town, was now trapped in a gilded cage she never asked for. She walked to the window, pulled the curtain aside, hoping to see some sign of life. But outside were only mist-covered mountains, still pine trees, and a gray sky as heavy as her mood. A soft knock on the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," Alara said, her voice raspy in the unfamiliar space. An older woman entered, her silver hair neatly tied back. She wore a housekeeper's uniform, her expression stern but not unkind. "I'm Mrs. Helen," she said, her voice calm and clear. "I'll be tending to your needs while you're here. Breakfast is ready in the dining room." Alara nodded, forcing a faint smile. "Thank you. I'll be down shortly." Mrs. Helen gave her a curious look but said nothing more. She bowed slightly and left the room. Alara dressed in a simple dress from the wardrobe, every item perfectly her size, eerily so, and made her way down the spiral staircase. Her footsteps echoed through the vast empty halls, each one reminding her that she didn't belong here. The dining room was as vast as it was cold. A long walnut table stood at its center, set with a selection of refined dishes, toast, eggs Benedict, fresh fruit, and a steaming pot of fragrant coffee. But only one place setting had been prepared. Alara glanced around, hoping to see Gabriel, but he wasn't there. She sat down, feeling like an uninvited guest in a home that now bore her name. Mrs. Helen reappeared and poured her coffee. "You don't need to wait for the master," she said, as if reading Alara's mind. "He usually takes breakfast in his study, or not at all." Alara nodded, though unease twisted in her chest. Gabriel Thorne, the man who claimed to be her husband, hadn't made a single effort to speak with her. She picked up the spoon and stirred her coffee, trying to remain composed. "Mrs. Helen," she said gently but firmly, "may I ask you something?" The housekeeper paused, her hands folded neatly in front of her. "You may, but I fear not every question will have an answer." "Why am I here?" Alara asked, looking directly into the woman's eyes. "Gabriel, what does he want from me? I'm not really his wife, am I?" Mrs. Helen let out a quiet sigh, and for a moment something soft passed through her eyes. "Legally, you are his wife. As for what he wants, I don't think he even knows. But you are here because he chose for you to be. That's all I can say." Alara wanted to press further, but the look in Helen's eyes was a gentle warning. She fell silent and turned back to her breakfast, even though every bite stuck in her throat. The following days passed in a monotonous loop. Alara was free to move around the mansion, but not allowed to leave the estate. She had no phone, no internet, no way to reach the outside world. Every exit was locked, and the few staff members seemed trained to avoid conversation. Gabriel rarely appeared, usually late in the evenings, seated in the living room with a glass of whiskey and a stack of documents. He never spoke to her, only offered a brief nod when she entered, his gaze as cold as stone. Still, Ilara noticed he made sure she lacked nothing. Clothes, food, books, everything was provided with meticulous care, as if she were a valuable possession to be preserved. One evening, as rain poured down like it meant to drown the mountain, Ilara couldn't bear the silence any longer. She walked into the living room where Gabriel sat, the firelight casting shadows on his face, softening his otherwise rigid features. She stood before him, fists clenched. "I need to know," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "Why are you keeping me here? If you don't want me, don't need me, why not let me go?" Gabriel looked up, his ash-gray eyes locking onto hers. Deep, unreadable. He set down his glass and rose to his full height, so tall she had to tilt her head to meet his gaze. "You want the truth?" he asked, his voice a rumble like distant thunder. "I'm not keeping you because I need you. I'm keeping you because I can't let you go." The words stunned her. She opened her mouth to speak, but Gabriel turned away and walked out, leaving her with 1,000 questions and no answers. She stood in the flickering firelight, feeling as though she had just brushed up against a secret even Gabriel couldn't face. That night, Ilara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the rain fall, thinking about Gabriel's words. "He doesn't need me, but he can't let me go." What did that mean? She thought about his eyes, that faint scar near his temple, the way he always kept his distance yet never treated her cruelly. He wasn't the man she feared, a tyrant or a brute. He was a mystery, a wall of ice she wasn't sure she wanted to break. She told herself, "I'm not here to love him. I'm here to survive." But deep down, a small voice whispered, "Or maybe something's waiting for me here, in this silence." She closed her eyes and let the rain lull her to sleep, unaware that at that very moment, in the dark study at the end of the hall, Gabriel was staring at an old photograph, a woman and a young girl, both smiling brightly. He gripped the photo tightly and whispered, "She's not you. But why does she make me feel this way?" The rain kept falling, as if the sky itself wept for the pain buried within the cold, hollow mansion. Ilara had grown used to the dull rhythm of life here. Meals eaten alone, long hours spent reading by the window, and those fleeting moments when she caught Gabriel's gaze, cool and guarded, yet occasionally flickering with something she couldn't quite name. But tonight was different. Ilara woke in the middle of the night, her body burning with fever. She trembled beneath the silk sheets, her nightgown soaked in sweat, hair clinging to her face. The fever had come suddenly, like a thief slipping in through the dark. She tried to sit up, but her head spun, her vision blurred. She whispered for Mrs. Helen, but her voice was so faint she could barely hear it herself. The vast room seemed to swallow every sound, leaving her alone with the silence. She didn't know how long she was unconscious, only that she vaguely remembered strong arms lifting her, the warmth of a solid chest easing the cold that gnawed at her bones. When she opened her eyes, the soft glow of a bedside lamp illuminated Gabriel's face. He was seated at the edge of her bed, one hand holding a cold cloth to her forehead, the other gripping a bottle of medicine. His ash-gray eyes weren't cold anymore. They were filled with worry, almost panic. "Don't move," he ordered, his deep voice tight with urgency. "Your fever's high. I called a doctor, but the mountain road is blocked by the storm. We have to wait until morning." Ilara tried to respond, but her throat was too dry. She could only look at him, stunned by his presence. Gabriel Thorne, the man who always kept his distance, was here, caring for her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She felt the warmth of his touch as he adjusted the cloth on her head, his movements gentle, almost reverent. "Why?" she whispered, her voice weak. "Why are you doing this?" Gabriel paused, his gaze locking with hers, deep and unreadable. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer, like all the times before. But then he spoke, voice rough with an emotion he seemed to fight back. "I can't take losing someone again." His words struck her like a stone tossed into a still lake. She wanted to ask more, to understand what lay behind that confession, but the fever pulled her under once more. Just before sleep claimed her, she felt his hand wrap around hers, firm, warm, and trembling, as if he feared she might slip away. When Alara woke again, soft morning light filtered through the curtains. She felt better, though still weak. The room looked the same, yet something had changed. A chair pulled close to her bed, a light blanket draped over it, as if someone had sat there all night. She touched her forehead. The cloth had been replaced. A glass of water sat on the nightstand. Mrs. Helen entered, carrying a tray of light food. "You're awake," she said, her voice gentler than usual. "You had us worried." "Gabriel," Alara hesitated. Was he here all night?" Mrs. Helen looked at her, momentarily surprised, then offered a small smile. "He didn't leave this room until the doctor arrived. He carried you up here from the sitting room when you fainted. I haven't seen him like that in a long time. Not since—" She stopped herself, as if realizing she'd said too much. Alara didn't press her, but her heart beat faster. She thought about Gabriel, his worried eyes, his broken voice. I can't take losing someone again. Who had he lost? And why had she, someone forced into his life, stirred that emotion in him? That afternoon, the doctor finally arrived. He confirmed that Alara's fever was from the weather change and exhaustion. He left some medication and advised rest. Alara sat by the window, watching the distant pines sway in the wind. She was still trying to piece together Gabriel's mystery when the door creaked open. Gabriel entered, dressed in his usual black suit, but something about him was different. He looked uncertain. In his hands was a small tray with a bowl of hot soup and a crusty roll. "Mrs. Helen said you should eat something," he said, setting the tray on the table beside her. Alara blinked. "You didn't have to do this. Mrs. Helen could have—" "I wanted to," he interrupted. His tone was firm, but not unkind. He stood there for a beat, unsure of what to do next, then finally sat down in the chair beside the bed. "How do you feel?" "Better," she said, trying not to show her surprise. "Thank you for last night." He didn't reply right away. He looked out the window instead, eyes distant. "I'm not good at taking care of people," he said after a long pause. "But I couldn't just stand there and watch you like that." Warmth bloomed in her chest. She didn't understand him, didn't know why he was doing this, but for the first time, she felt a crack in the icy wall he'd built around himself. She smiled softly, genuinely. "You're not as terrible as you think you are." Gabriel looked at her, something flickering in his expression. Then he stood abruptly, as if afraid that staying longer might expose too much. "Get some rest," he said before leaving the room. Alara sat quietly, the bowl of steaming soup untouched as a strange realization settled over her. She wasn't afraid of him anymore. That night, lying in bed, Alara thought about Gabriel, the way he had carried her, held her hand, the way his voice had cracked when he said he couldn't bear losing someone again. He wasn't her real husband. He wasn't someone who loved her. But something in his actions made her question whether he was truly as cold as he seemed. Maybe, she thought, somewhere deep inside him, there's still a broken piece of a heart trying to beat again. She closed her eyes, letting sleep take her. But tonight, for the first time, she didn't feel alone. In the silence, she heard the soft sound of footsteps in the hallway. Gabriel. She was sure it was him. He didn't come in. He only stood there for a moment, and then walked away. And for the first time since she arrived, Alara smiled in her sleep. Do you believe love can heal even the deepest scars? Share your thoughts in the comments. The storm outside roared on, thunder and rain colliding like a violent symphony echoing the chaos building inside Alara's heart. She sat in front of the fireplace, a forgotten book resting on her lap, her eyes drawn to the flashes of lightning streaking through the window. Storms always unsettled her, stirring memories of long nights in the old house, her father's shouting, the threats of loan sharks rattling the walls. Tonight that fear returned, tightening around her chest like a vice. Then darkness fell. The power went out suddenly, swallowing the room in terrifying silence, save for the thunder that shook the walls. Alara sprang to her feet, heart pounding, hands fumbling in the dark. She wasn't afraid of the dark, but the solitude, the helplessness in the middle of a storm made her feel like she was tumbling into a bottomless pit. "Someone," she whispered, her voice barely audible, unsure of who she was calling for. "Alara?" Gabriel's voice came from the hallway, low, steady, accompanied by the soft beam of a flashlight. She turned and saw him standing there, his shirt drenched and clinging to his muscular frame, every line of his body sharply defined. His black hair was tousled and dripping, rain running down the sharp angles of his face, making his ash-gray eyes appear even more intense, magnetic. He had just returned, likely caught in the storm on his way back from the city. "I'm here," she answered, her voice trembling. She tried to hide her fear, but a crack of thunder made her flinch. Gabriel moved toward her quickly, the flashlight casting her face into view, eyes wide, shimmering with panic. "Are you afraid of storms?" he asked. His voice wasn't mocking, only quietly concerned. Ilara bit her lip, unwilling to admit weakness, but the next thunderclap made her shudder, and the truth slipped through. Gabriel said nothing. He set the flashlight on the table, then gently pulled her toward the fireplace, where the embers still glowed faintly. He knelt, added more logs, and the flames roared back to life, casting warm light over them both. "Sit here," he said. His tone was commanding, but there was an irresistible softness beneath it. Ilara obeyed, pulling her knees to her chest and trying to steady her breath. Gabriel sat beside her, closer than she expected, the heat of his body slowly easing the cold from her bones. They sat in silence, the crackle of burning wood mingling with the rhythmic tapping of rain. Ilara stared into the fire, trying to ground herself, but she could feel Gabriel's eyes on her. He was watching her, not with his usual detachment, but with restrained hunger, like he was fighting something inside himself. She turned to face him, and their eyes met, deep, intense, like two flames colliding in the dark. "You don't have to stay," she whispered, her voice soft but steady. "I'll be fine." Gabriel tilted his head, the firelight illuminating the small scar near his temple, highlighting the pain he always kept hidden. "I don't want you to be alone," he said, his voice gravelly, every word sounding like a battle. "Not tonight." Those words struck like lightning, shattering whatever distance remained between them. Ilara felt her heart pounding, not from the storm, but from him. This man, so mysterious and cold, was now sitting beside her, his eyes devouring her with intensity. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his, a bold kiss full of longing and defiance, as if daring both him and herself to feel. Gabriel responded instantly, no hesitation. His kiss was fierce, almost desperate, like something he had buried too long was finally breaking free. He pulled her into his arms, his strong hands gripping her waist, holding her tightly against him. The heat of his touch, the weight of his kiss, made the rest of the world disappear. They sank onto the rug before the fire, their shadows flickering across the walls. Gabriel paused for a breathless moment, staring into her eyes, his breathing ragged. "Ilara," he whispered, voice hoarse with desire and something deeper. "Are you sure? You've never—" "I haven't," she interrupted softly, her fingers brushing the scar on his temple. "But I want you. I'm not afraid." Her words ignited something in him. Gabriel kissed her again, deeper, more urgently. His hands moved over her body, slowly unfastening the silk nightgown, with a care that belied the fire beneath his touch. Every brush of his fingers, every kiss felt meaningful, like he was trying to memorize her into his soul. Ilara reached for him, her hands exploring the firm muscles beneath his damp shirt, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I didn't think I could feel this again," he murmured between kisses, his voice cracking. "Not until you." They came together, not just in body but in soul, two people unraveling, colliding, healing. Gabriel's every movement was powerful but reverent, as if trying to erase every scar on both their hearts. Ilara clung to him, letting herself be swept away, surrendering to this moment where nothing else mattered. No past, no pain, just this. Outside, thunder roared and rain fell in torrents, but inside there was only heat. The firelight danced on their skin, painting a picture of intensity and tenderness. When it was over, they lay tangled in each other's arms, sweat glistening on their bodies, breaths mingled in the quiet. Gabriel pulled her close, his arms tightening around her like he was afraid to let go. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "You're not something I own, Alara. You're everything I never let myself hope for." Alara smiled and rested her cheek against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, in the storm, she had found something real, something hers. She closed her eyes, letting his warmth lull her to sleep. And for the first time, she felt like she belonged, right here, in the arms of the man who was holding her like she was his whole world. After the stormy night, the air inside the mansion felt lighter, as if the rain had washed away some of the cold that had clung to its walls for far too long. Alara woke in her now familiar bedroom, but this time she didn't feel alone. The warmth of the night before, of Gabriel's arms, still lingered on her skin, a tender reminder that she was no longer just a stranger in this house. She smiled, small but sincere, thinking of him, the mysterious man with the locked-up heart who had let her touch a hidden corner of it. She slipped into a soft, light blue cotton dress from the wardrobe, choosing something simpler, something that felt more like herself. When she came down the stairs, Gabriel wasn't in the dining room as usual. Mrs. Helen was clearing the table, and when she saw Alara, she offered a rare smile. "The master is in the garden," she said, her tone carrying a hint of meaning. "He said you should come when you're ready." Alara blinked. The garden? She had seen it from the window, but she'd never been allowed outside. The iron gates and the watchful eyes of the staff had always reminded her that she was a guest under careful restrictions. But today felt different. She nodded, a flicker of curiosity and excitement stirring in her chest. The garden lay behind the mansion, hidden behind an old wooden gate. When Alara pushed it open, a cool breeze carrying the sweet scent of flowers washed over her, making her pause. Before her stretched a sea of lavender, a soft purple wave swaying gently beneath the morning sun. Tiny blossoms whispered in the wind, telling stories she had never been invited to hear. In the center of the garden stood Gabriel, sleeves rolled up, pruning shears in hand, looking strangely at peace. He glanced up at the sound of her footsteps, and a faint light flickered in his ash-gray eyes. "I thought you should see this," he said, his voice low but no longer cold. "It means something to me." Alara walked closer, unable to take her eyes off the lavender. "It's beautiful," she whispered, gently brushing her fingers across the soft petals. "Why didn't you let me come here sooner?" Gabriel was silent for a moment, his gaze lost in the field of flowers, as if staring into a distant memory. "I built this for my daughter," he said, voice raw and quiet. "She loved lavender. She said it made her feel like she was dreaming." Alara felt her heart tighten. His daughter. Gabriel had never spoken of family before, but now she understood. He had lost something irreplaceable. She didn't ask more. She simply stood beside him, letting silence say what words couldn't. "Can I help you take care of them?" she asked softly. "These flowers, they deserve to be loved." Gabriel looked at her, surprised. Then he nodded. "All right," he said. And for the first time, she saw a smile break across his lips. Not wide, not obvious, but enough to make her heart skip. A real smile. That afternoon, Alara decided to try baking in the mansion's enormous kitchen. She needed something normal, something warm and comforting to fight off the lingering weight of her past. Mrs. Helen guided her gently, but Alara, adorably clumsy, burned an entire batch of cookies. The smell of charred sugar filled the kitchen, and just as she was holding the blackened tray in dismay, Gabriel walked in. I'm sorry," she stammered, cheeks flushed. "I just wanted to try something normal." Gabriel looked at the tray, then at her, and to her astonishment he laughed, a deep, warm laugh that echoed through the kitchen, shattering the silence that had ruled this house for so long. Alara froze. She had never seen him laugh. She hadn't even believed he could laugh. But here he was. His face lit up, his usual sternness softened, revealing someone entirely new. "You're a disaster in the kitchen," he chuckled, eyes twinkling with something close to affection. "But I bet you'll get better." Alara burst into laughter, the tension melting away. "Oh, is that a challenge? Next time I'll bake something so good you'll be begging for more." "I'll hold you to it," Gabriel replied. In that moment, They weren't two strangers forced into marriage. They were just two people, sharing burnt cookies and blooming laughter between lavender fields and healing hearts. That evening, Gabriel invited Alara to join him for dinner. Truly join him for the first time. The meal wasn't extravagant, but it was prepared with care. Beef stew, mashed potatoes, and a bottle of red wine. Candlelight flickered across the table, casting a warm glow over everything, making the room feel intimate for the first time. Alara spoke of her days as a nurse back in the small town, the patients who made her laugh, those who made her cry. Gabriel listened, not just politely but deeply. He asked questions, offered quiet comments. She realized he wasn't just hearing her. He wanted to understand her. After dinner, they sat by the fireplace, each with a glass of wine. Gabriel told her about the lavender, how he learned to care for them to keep his daughter's memory alive. Alara's heart swelled. "You're a wonderful father," she said sincerely, "and I think you're a good man too." Gabriel looked at her, something stirring in his eyes, something unspoken, powerful. He set down his glass and reached for her hand, his fingers brushing lightly over hers. "You make me want to believe that," he murmured. "You make me want to live again." Alara smiled and squeezed his hand gently. She thought of the stormy night, of the way they'd found each other in the dark. And now, in the soft glow of firelight, she felt something she hadn't dared admit until now. I could fall in love with this man. When they rose to return to their rooms, Gabriel held her hand a little longer, his gaze saying what his lips didn't. Alara walked up the stairs, her heart full and burning bright. She didn't know what the future held, but tonight she knew she had found a place to belong. Not within the mansion's walls, but in Gabriel's eyes, in his first real smile. In the days following their night by the fire, Alara sensed a shift in the atmosphere of the mansion. No longer did it feel like a cold prison. Something in Gabriel's touch, his glances, had lit a quiet warmth that seeped into the once silent halls. They never spoke of that night, but their eyes did, deep, charged with meaning, as if exchanging a promise that needed no words. Alara began to feel she wasn't just someone forced into this place, but someone meant to be part of Gabriel's world, even if that world was still laced with shadows. That morning, she woke to pale sunlight streaming through the curtains. She dressed in a soft knit dress and made her way to the kitchen, where the scent of toasted bread and coffee filled the air. Mrs. Helen was preparing breakfast, and Gabriel had already gone out, as he often did. But today he left something behind, a small note resting on the table. "Meet me in the lavender garden this afternoon. There's something I want to show you." Alara read the words over and over again, her heart quickening. He had never left her a note before. This quiet gesture, this choice to reach out, made her feel both nervous and strangely hopeful. She spent the morning in the garden, trimming dry stems and watering the roots, soaking in the calm this place offered. Her thoughts kept drifting to Gabriel, to the story he'd shared about his daughter, to the grief in his eyes. She wanted to ask him more, to understand the full picture, but she knew he needed time, and she was willing to wait. That afternoon, just as Alara was about to head to the garden, a sharp chime rang through the quiet mansion. The doorbell. She froze. Visitors were rare. Gabriel always knew in advance. Mrs. Helen hurried to answer it, and Alara paused in the hallway, curiosity tinged with unease. A woman's voice sliced through the stillness, sharp, cool, and confident. "Tell Gabriel Sophia is here. I need to see him." Alara stepped forward cautiously. Standing in the entryway was a tall, slender woman in her early 30s, with sleek brown hair and piercing blue eyes. She wore an expensive coat and radiated authority and mystery. When her eyes met Alara's, she arched an eyebrow, more in judgment than curiosity. "And you are?" the woman asked, voice dripping with disdain. "The new maid?" Alara stood tall, refusing to be intimidated. "I'm Alara, Gabriel's wife." Sophia laughed, dry, bitter, and sharp. "Wife? Really? Gabriel married you?" She stepped inside without waiting for permission, her eyes sweeping the room like she was hunting for something. "I'm Sophia, sister of his late wife, and I have a few things you need to hear." Mrs. Helen looked ready to step in, but Alara lifted her hand. She felt a chill crawl down her spine, but she wouldn't show fear. "If you have something to say, say it," Alara replied, voice calm but firm. Sophia sat on the sofa, crossing her legs, eyes sharp as blades. "Do you know why Gabriel married you? Because you're a pawn, a placeholder. You're not her. You'll never be her." Her voice turned colder. "My sister died because of him. He was drunk behind the wheel. He caused the crash. He killed her and their daughter." The words struck Alara like a blade to the chest. She stood frozen, her mind spinning. Gabriel, drunk, a crash. The pieces, his pain, the lavender garden, his haunted expression when he said, "I can't take losing someone again," all twisted into a jagged, terrifying picture. She wanted to scream that Sophia was lying, that none of it could be true. But the ice in Sophia's voice made her falter. "You're lying," Alara whispered, but her voice trembled. Sophia smirked, cruel and satisfied. "Ask him. Look him in the eye and ask if he'll deny it." She rose, placing a business card on the table. "If you want the truth, call me. But consider this a warning. Gabriel is not who you think he is. He's a destroyer." And just like that, Sophia left, leaving Alara standing in silence, her hands trembling. She picked up the card but didn't look at it. The floor beneath her seemed to vanish. Gabriel, the man who held her in a storm, who smiled at her in the kitchen, who opened his heart in the lavender garden. Could he truly be the man Sophia claimed? When Gabriel returned that evening, Alara was seated in the living room, Sophia's card lying on the table in front of her. He walked in wearing his usual black suit, but his face lit up slightly at the sight of her. "Alara," he said softly, "I wanted to take you to a special spot in the garden today. There's a lavender bush my daughter planted herself." He stopped when he saw her face. Alara looked up, her blue eyes filled with pain and uncertainty. "Gabriel," she interrupted, voice trembling, "someone came today." "Sophia, she said she's your late wife's sister." Gabriel froze. His expression darkened immediately, like a wall slamming into place. "Sophia," he repeated, his voice cold. "What did she want?" Alara stood, heart pounding. "She said you caused the accident, that you were drunk when you were driving, that you killed your wife and daughter." Every word was a wound, but she forced them out. "Tell me it's not true. Look me in the eyes and tell me she lied." Gabriel said nothing. He looked at her, his eyes full of torment, but not a single word escaped his lips. The silence spoke for him, and Alara felt her heart begin to shatter. She stepped back, tears welling up but refusing to fall. "You won't deny it," she whispered. "You have nothing to say?" Gabriel clenched his fists, as if battling himself. At last his voice came out rough and low. "I have no excuse." That was the final blow. Alara turned and fled up the stairs, slamming the door behind her. She curled up on the bed, clutching her arms around herself, fighting back the sobs clawing at her throat. She had started to love him. She had started to believe he was someone she could trust. But now all of it, every moment, felt like a lie. In the darkness, she heard footsteps stop outside her door. Gabriel. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He just stood there for a long, heavy moment, then walked away. And for the first time since coming to this house, Alara felt truly lost, like a bird locked in a cage, with no idea where to fly. Snow fell thick across the mountains surrounding the mansion, blanketing everything in white, as if trying to bury the last remnants of hope in Alara's heart. She sat on the edge of the bed, trembling hands clutching an old newspaper clipping she had found in Gabriel's desk drawer. The headline read, "CEO Gabriel Thorne involved in fatal car accident." The article didn't mention alcohol, but referenced a controversy over responsibility and the tragic loss of the Thorne family. That article, combined with Sophia's words and Gabriel's silence, felt like knives slicing through her chest. Alara glanced at the small suitcase already open on the floor. Inside, a few clothes, a book, and one dried lavender sprig from the garden. She thought about the contract, the paper that had bound her to Gabriel, to this mansion, in exchange for her father's life. She knew leaving might mean the mafia wouldn't forgive her. They could come for her, or worse, for her father. But staying here, trapped in a marriage built on secrets and silence, was more painful than any threat they could make. She stood before the mirror, staring into her tear-bright blue eyes, eyes that now held heartbreak. I came here to save my father, to pay a debt, she thought, but I can't save myself if I stay. She had fallen for Gabriel. She had given him her heart and her body, but his silence had spoken louder than any vow. It told her she wasn't worthy of the truth. She deserved better: love, honesty, respect. Not to be a pawn in his grief or in the mafia's game. Wearing a thick sweater under a heavy coat, she pulled the suitcase behind her. She paused at the window, looking out at the snow-covered lavender garden. She had stood there with Gabriel. He had smiled at her there. A part of her wanted to stay, wanted to believe he'd open his heart. But a stronger part, the part that still had pride, urged her to go. She rolled the suitcase down the stairs, careful to make as little noise as possible. The mansion was dim, lit only by the soft glow of the wall sconces. But as she reached the living room, she froze. Gabriel stood by the window, a glass of whiskey in hand, staring out into the snow. He wore a white dress shirt, the collar undone, his dark hair tousled as if he hadn't slept. He turned when he heard her footsteps. His eyes landed on the suitcase. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice low but tight, like a storm straining behind restraint. Elora took a deep breath, keeping her voice steady. "I can't stay, Gabriel. Not when you won't give me the truth. Not when I found this." She held up the article, her voice shaking. "This is you, isn't it? You let them die, and you never told me." Gabriel stiffened, his gaze darkening as it fell on the paper. He stepped closer, but didn't touch her. "Elora," he rasped, "that's not the whole story. You don't understand." "Then tell me," she cried, tears spilling freely, and for once she didn't wipe them away. "I loved you, Gabriel. I gave you everything. My heart, my body, my trust. I came here because of a contract, because of my father, because of the mafia. But I stayed because of you, because I thought you were different. But your silence made me feel like I was nothing." Gabriel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, the war within him playing out on his face. "You want the truth?" he said, his voice cracking. "The truth is, I live with that guilt every day. I wasn't drunk that night, Elora, but I couldn't save them. I tried, and I failed. And I married you not because of the contract, but because you made me want to live again." His words halted her, but not enough to make her stay. She shook her head, tears streaking her cheeks. "You could have told me that from the beginning. You could have trusted me, but instead, you shut me out. I'm not your wife, Gabriel. I'm not a replacement. And I can't live in a house where I don't even know who I am, even if it means facing the mafia." She turned, dragging the suitcase toward the door. Gabriel followed and grabbed her hand, more desperately this time. "Elora," he whispered, voice fractured. "Don't go. I couldn't protect them, but I can protect you. I swear, they won't touch you." She stopped and looked up into his eyes, saw the pain, the pleading, the fear of losing her. But gently she pried his hand off hers. "Protect me," she said softly. "You couldn't protect me from the truth. I'd rather face the mafia than live with someone who can't open his heart. I deserve love, and I deserve to know the truth." She opened the door and stepped out. Gabriel stood frozen as the cold rushed in. Snow fell hard, landing on her hair, her coat cold, but not as cold as what had settled inside her chest. She didn't know where she was going. She didn't know how she'd escape the mafia, but she knew she had to leave, for her dignity, for her heart, for the part of her that still knew who she was. Inside the mansion, Gabriel stood at the window, watching her silhouette vanish into the snow. He gripped the glass of whiskey, but didn't drink. He wanted to run after her, to tell her everything. About that night, about how he swerved the car to shield his daughter, about the pain that had never stopped. But he didn't. He had lived with loss too long, and now he let her go, just as he had let his wife and daughter slip away. In the silence, he whispered, voice ragged, "I'm sorry, Elora. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to hold on to you. If you believe fate can bring two broken souls together, like and share this story with someone who needs it." Snow continued to fall, blanketing the winding mountain road and erasing Alara's footsteps. She dragged her small suitcase behind her, each step heavy with the weight of a broken heart. She had no destination, no plan, no shelter, but she knew she couldn't go back. Not after Gabriel's silence. Not after realizing she had fallen for a man she didn't truly understand. The mafia contract, the newspaper article, and Sophia's words haunted her like ghosts, but it was pride that had driven her from the mansion, even if the price might be her life or her father's. The mountain road was deserted, filled only with the whistling wind and the soft fall of snow. Alara clutched her coat tighter around her body, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. She tried not to think of Gabriel, of his pained eyes as she walked away, but his image lingered, unshakable. He said he would protect me from the mafia, she thought, but he couldn't protect me from the truth. She shook her head and forced herself to focus on each step, but deep down, fear was growing. The mafia didn't forgive those who broke contracts, and they would find her. Just hours later, her fear became reality. A black car emerged from the snow, its headlights cutting through the haze. Alara stopped in her tracks, heart pounding. She wanted to run, but her feet felt frozen to the ground. Two men stepped out, their faces cold, eyes sharp as blades. She recognized one of them, the same man who had delivered her to the mansion the night she signed the contract. "Miss Morgan," the man said, his voice flat but threatening. "Did you really think you could run? This contract isn't a game. If you don't return to Thorn, your father will pay first, then you." Alara clenched her fists, trying to keep her voice from trembling. "I don't belong to him. I don't belong to anyone. Do whatever you want, but I'm not going back." The man smirked, stepping closer, his large hand wrapping around her wrist. "You're more stubborn than I thought. But the mafia doesn't care about pride. Come with us, or we'll drag you." Alara yanked her arm back, but he was too strong. She screamed and kicked his leg, but another hand grabbed her hair and yanked hard. Pain shot through her scalp, but she didn't stop resisting, even knowing it was useless. And then, another set of headlights pierced the storm, followed by the roar of an engine. A second car skidded to a stop beside them. The door flew open, and Gabriel stepped out. His eyes were razor-sharp, filled with fury. He wore a black coat, hair soaked in snow, but his entire presence radiated danger. "Let her go," he said, voice deep and commanding. "Now!" The thug sneered, but there was hesitation in his eyes. "This isn't your business, Thorn." She broke the contract. "She belongs to us." Gabriel stepped forward without flinching. "She belongs to me," he said coldly. "And if you touch her again, I swear, your entire operation will pay." Before the man could react, Gabriel lunged, punching him square in the jaw. The second thug drew a knife, but Gabriel was faster, kicking the blade away and tackling him to the snow. Alara stood frozen, heart racing, unable to believe what she was seeing. Gabriel, usually so controlled, was now fighting like a wild animal, ruthless and fearless, all for her. But the fight didn't last long. One of the men slashed Gabriel's shoulder with a blade, sending him staggering. Blood bloomed through his coat. Alara screamed and rushed to him, but Gabriel shoved her aside and kept fighting, until the attacker collapsed unconscious. The other man fled, disappearing into the blizzard. Gabriel fell to his knees, gripping his bleeding shoulder. Alara dropped beside him, tears streaming down her face. "Gabriel, why did you do this?" she whispered, voice shaking. "Why did you come?" He looked at her, his storm gray eyes filled with pain. "Because I can't lose you," he said hoarsely. "Not the way I lost them." Alara couldn't speak. She helped him up and loaded him into the car, racing toward the nearest hospital, her heart pounding with fear, and something else she couldn't name. At the hospital, Gabriel was rushed into emergency care. Alara sat alone in the hallway, her clothes stained with his blood, hands trembling in her lap. She thought about the way he had fought for her, the way he had said, "I can't lose you." She had walked away believing he didn't need her, but his actions said the opposite. When the doctor finally came out and said Gabriel would be okay, that the wound was deep but not life-threatening, Alara felt her knees weaken with relief. She entered his room. Gabriel lay on the bed, shoulder bandaged, face pale but alert. Alara sat beside him silently, then reached for his hand, warm and alive. "Ilara," he said, voice rough but steady, "I owe you the truth." Her heart thudded. "Then tell me," she whispered. "Everything." Gabriel drew a long breath, his eyes drifting into a haunted memory. "That night, my wife and I were fighting. She wanted a divorce, said I wasn't the man she married anymore. We argued in the car, in the rain. I wasn't drunk, Ilara, I swear. But then, our daughter ran into the road. She just wanted us to stop fighting. I swerved to save her. The car hit a tree. My wife died instantly. My daughter," he closed his eyes, "she survived 3 more days. I couldn't save them. I'll never forgive myself." Ilara's tears fell freely now, but she didn't let go of his hand. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you let me think you killed them?" Gabriel met her eyes, guilt etched across his face. "Because I was afraid. Afraid you'd look at me the way I look at myself. A failure. I married you because of the contract, yes, but I kept you because you made me want to live. Not as a replacement, but as a reason to be human again." Ilara leaned forward, resting her forehead on his hand, her tears soaking his skin. "I thought you didn't need me," she whispered. "I thought I was just part of your past." Gabriel lifted his good arm and gently cupped her cheek. "You're my present," he said firmly, "and if you let me, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that." Ilara smiled through her tears and held his hand tighter. She didn't know what the future held. She didn't know what the Mafia would do, but for the first time, she felt they truly belonged to each other. Not because of a contract, not because of the past, but because of the truth they finally dared to share. The pale morning sun filtered through the trees, casting soft light on the narrow road leading into the cemetery. Ilara sat beside Gabriel in a black car, her hand wrapped tightly around his, feeling the lingering warmth through the bandages still covering the wounds on his fingers. After several days in the hospital, Gabriel was well enough to be discharged, but the scar on his shoulder and the one buried deep within his heart were still reminders of all they had endured. Ilara looked at him. The gray in his eyes no longer held ice, but something fragile and peaceful, as if, through her, he had reclaimed a part of himself. Today, Gabriel was bringing her somewhere he had never brought anyone before, the cemetery where his wife and daughter were buried. "I need you there," he had said the night before, his voice raspy but sincere. "I need to say goodbye, and I want you to witness it." Ilara had nodded without asking more, though her heart thudded. This wasn't just a visit, it was a turning point, for him, for her, for what they were becoming. The cemetery lay on the outskirts of town, quiet and secluded, its gravestones lovingly maintained. Gabriel stopped the car and stepped out, opening the door for Ilara. He took her hand and led her down the gravel path to a small corner beneath an old oak tree. In front of them were 2 headstones, one large, one small, engraved with the names Clara Thorne and Lily Thorne. Beside them stood a vase of fresh lavender, undoubtedly placed there by Gabriel. Ilara stood silently, feeling the weight of this moment settle into her chest. She watched Gabriel draw in a long breath, gathering every ounce of courage. He knelt before the stones, placing his hand gently on the cold surface, his eyes drifting into memories only he could see. "Clara," he began, voice trembling, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry our last words were a fight. I've lived with that guilt every single day, thinking I didn't deserve to be happy again. But I know you wouldn't want that. You always told me to find light, even in the darkest places." He turned toward the smaller stone. His voice cracked as he spoke his daughter's name. "Lily, you were the joy in my life. I built the lavender garden for you. But I know, you wouldn't want me to live in memory alone. You'd want me to laugh, to live again." Tears welled in Ilara's eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She stayed quiet, letting Gabriel pour out the words he had held in for too long. Then he looked at her, his gaze full of raw emotion, and reached for her hand, pulling her closer. "This is Ilara," he said, stronger now, as if introducing her to the people he had loved most. "She's not here to replace you, Clara, or you, Lily. She's here because she holds what's left of me. The part of me you once loved. The part our daughter used to light up." Elara knelt beside him, her hand resting gently on his. She looked at the gravestones and, for the first time, didn't feel like an intruder in Gabriel's story. "Clara, Lily," she whispered, voice soft but steady. "I didn't come to replace you. I came to live beside him, to love him, if he still dares to love." Gabriel looked at her, his eyes glistening. Not with tears, but with a kind of release he had never known. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, as if she were the only solid thing in a crumbling world. "You are my light, Elara," he whispered into her hair. "I thought I didn't deserve it, but you make me want to try." They sat there in silence before the graves, the wind carrying the scent of lavender from the vase like a blessing from the past. Elara could feel it, that something inside Gabriel had been freed, and she knew from that moment on they would walk forward together, not as echoes of the past, but as two souls who had found each other in the present. On their way back, Gabriel held Elara's hand tighter, like he feared she might vanish again. He stopped the car near a small stream where the afternoon sun shimmered across the water. He turned to her, his gaze deep and unwavering. "I never thought I'd find someone like you," he said. "When I married you because of the contract, all I wanted was to keep you safe from the mafia. But now, I want to keep you because I love you." Elara smiled, her heart swelling. She leaned in and kissed him, a soft, meaningful kiss. "I was afraid I couldn't pull you out of the dark," she murmured. "But now I know. We can create the light together." They sat by the stream, fingers intertwined, speaking of the future, a future no longer bound by contracts, by mafia threats, or ghosts of the past. Elara knew the danger wasn't gone, that the mafia could still return, but she wasn't afraid anymore. With Gabriel, she felt stronger than ever. As the sun dipped low, they returned to the mansion. It no longer felt like a cold prison. It was a home where they would begin writing the next chapter of their story. Elara looked at Gabriel. He smiled, not a smile born of pain, but one filled with hope, and she knew, whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. When Elara and Gabriel returned from the cemetery, the golden glow of sunset had faded into the calm of night, casting a peaceful veil over the estate. Outside, the lavender garden swayed quietly under the moonlight, as if whispering a blessing upon them. In the car, Gabriel's hand held tightly to Elara's, his fingers interlaced with hers, as though he never wanted to let go of the sacred moment they had just shared. When he said goodbye to Clara and Lily, and when Elara stood beside him, becoming the light that had led him through the dark, she looked at him, and in his storm-gray eyes she saw something new. Freedom. She smiled, squeezing his hand gently, and he returned her gaze with a depth full of love. They entered the mansion slowly, not rushing, as if savoring every second together. Gabriel suggested they sit by the fireplace, and Elara nodded, her heart warm at the thought. In the living room, the fire crackled softly, casting a golden glow across their faces. Gabriel sat down on the rug and pulled Elara close beside him. Their shoulders touched, and his warmth seeped through the soft fabric of her dress. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low and searching her eyes. "Today wasn't easy, for either of us." Elara leaned her head on his shoulder, smiling. "I'm okay," she whispered, sincere. "Today I saw you let go, Gabriel, and I'm happy I was there with you." Gabriel turned toward her, his eyes shimmering in the firelight. "You don't know how much you mean to me," he whispered, brushing her hair back. "I've lived in the dark for too long, Elara. But you're the light, the reason I want to live again." His words pierced her heart, sending warmth radiating through her chest. She lifted her gaze to meet his and saw a sea of emotion, love, gratitude, and a deep longing. "I used to think I didn't deserve to be loved," she said, her voice trembling. "But you showed me I do. You gave me a reason to believe in love." Time seemed to stand still between them, the only sound the crackling of wood and the soft rhythm of their breaths. Gabriel leaned in, kissing her gently. The kiss grew deeper, hungrier, as if they were giving each other every piece of their souls. He pulled back, his voice rough with emotion. "Elara," he murmured, "I want you, not just tonight, but always. I want us to belong to each other completely." She smiled, tears shimmering in her lashes. "I want you too," she whispered. I want us to be free in this love. Without another word, Gabriel stood and gently lifted her into his arms, strong and tender. Ilara wrapped her arms around his neck, resting her cheek against his shoulder, feeling the safety and warmth he gave. He carried her up the stairs into his bedroom, where moonlight streamed through the curtains and washed the bed in a silver glow. He laid her down, never breaking eye contact. He removed his shirt, revealing the scar on his shoulder, a mark from the night he fought for her. Ilara traced it with her fingertips, a silent promise to heal every hurt. Gabriel kissed her again, lips moving from her mouth to her neck, to her collarbone, each touch a vow, each kiss a memory being rewritten. They came together not in desperate hunger, but in deep, profound love, releasing every wound of the past. Gabriel moved with purpose and reverence, cherishing her as if to say she was his world. Ilara held him close, surrendering wholly to him, her heart finally unafraid. "I love you," she whispered, voice breaking with emotion as their bodies and souls melted into one. "Forever, Gabriel." He held her tighter, pressing his lips to her forehead. "I love you too," he said firmly, "in every lifetime." When everything quieted, they lay together, moonlight glistening on their skin like stardust. Gabriel cradled her in his arms, stroking her hair, whispering, "You're my home, Ilara. You're where I always want to return." Ilara smiled, nuzzling into his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "And you're my light," she murmured. "The reason I dared to love." 1.5 years later, the mountain estate had become a true home, filled with warmth and laughter. The lavender garden bloomed year-round, and the marble walls were now adorned with paintings and family photos. Laughter echoed from the living room, where Ilara was playing with their 6-month-old son, Ethan, a baby with Gabriel's storm-gray eyes and her radiant smile. Not long after that fateful night by the fire, Ilara had discovered she was pregnant. It was a gift from life itself, as if the universe was blessing their love. She kissed Ethan's cheek, joy filling her heart. Gabriel walked in, sleeves rolled up, and his eyes lit up at the sight of them. He had become a devoted father, a loving husband, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. Kneeling, he kissed Ethan's forehead and looked at Ilara with a knowing glint in his eyes. "Can Mrs. Helen watch Ethan for a little while?" he asked softly, a bit nervous. "I have something to show you." Curious, Ilara smiled and handed Ethan to Mrs. Helen, who stood nearby. Gabriel led her into the lavender garden, where golden sunlight bathed the purple blooms in a dreamlike glow. At the center of the garden, a small table was set with candles, flowers, and a bottle of red wine sparkling in the fading light. "Gabriel, what are you doing?" she asked with a soft laugh, but her heart raced when he knelt down and pulled out a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a white gold ring with a deep sapphire stone, as blue as her eyes. "Ilara Morgan," he said, voice steady and full of love. "Our first wedding was forced, a contract. But today I ask you again, not for the mafia, not because of the past, but because I love you and I love Ethan. Will you be my wife, truly forever?" Tears welled up in Ilara's eyes. She dropped to her knees and embraced him, whispering, "Yes, Gabriel, I will be your wife, every day, every moment, forever." Gabriel slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a deep emotional kiss, surrounded by waves of lavender. They held each other in the golden dusk, the light wrapping around them like a blessing. Ilara looked into his eyes and saw her whole world, a husband, a father, a man who had fought to love and to be loved. "You gave me a family," she whispered, voice trembling, "and if I hadn't been forced to marry you that day, I might never have known I was worthy of being loved like this." Gabriel smiled and kissed her forehead. "And you gave me a reason to live," he replied. "Ethan, you and our future, that's the light I was always looking for." Hand in hand, they returned to the house where Ethan was waiting. Under the golden lights of the mansion, they knew their story, born from pain, had become a song of love, healing, and soft whispers in the quiet. Ilara and Gabriel found light in the darkest places. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that touch the heart.